All right, let me now introduce a very special guest, former Gophers linebacker and now market analysis personality, Pete Najarian. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great, man. It's great to be with you. I'm excited about it, and go Gophers.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start with that. You're obviously a Minnesota guy, grew up in Minnesota. I always find it interesting to learn about old school recruiting stories because it's so different nowadays, all in the public eye. How did you, I guess, end up with the Gophers, and how did that decision come from your end?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's kind of an interesting story because I'm from that era of I came out of high school in 1981. And when I was getting recruited, I was very lucky. And I think a lot of that has to do with the brothers that I had that were all older brothers of mine who got recruited across the country as well. So we all played linebacker. We all played, on offense, I played tailback as well, which is what I thought I was. I learned quickly that I was more of a linebacker than a tailback in college, but coming out of high school, that's what I did. And I was lucky enough to get recruited by a lot of Pac-12 schools. Back then they were the Pac-10. and I also got recruited by some of the SEC schools, which was unusual, but that was cool. And Notre Dame and a lot of schools, but I narrowed it down to Minnesota and Cal Berkeley. And the reason I picked Cal Berkeley was my father went to school there. He was recruited by them, played in the Rose Bowl in 1949. His brothers all played there. I had two brothers, John and Paul, who played out Cal Berkeley. And, it was kind of like a natural fit. I thought, you know what, this would be great. And my dad sort of last minute, I took forever to make my decision. My decision back then, everybody signed on the same day. It was a national signing day. And that was in February. And Notre Dame was making a hard push, man. They were smart. I got to tell you, they were really smart because I was flattered that they were recruiting me because I knew the history of Notre Dame football. And they flew up a couple different times in their private jet, and they wined and dined my mother. They were smart. They didn't go after me. They went after my mom. They brought her flowers on Valentine's Day, which was just a couple days before the signing date. And they got her, they filled our kitchen with flowers. And so my mom was kind of taken with that. She thought, wow, that's pretty cool. But I decided it was going to either be Minnesota or if I stayed in the Big Ten, or Cal Berkeley is how I determined it. I loved Nebraska, but it wasn't for me. My dad was very academic guy. He's the chief of surgery at the University of Minnesota. So he was into the academics. So was I. And he just said, look, you go to Berkeley, you can do anything in life you ever want. And if you go to the University of Minnesota, that's got great credentials across the country. So he said, I think that those would be good schools for you. And that's what I nailed it down to. But the problem I had, Tony, was I couldn't make up my mind. So I asked both schools if I could have a month to kind of think a little bit longer about my decision. Well, by them doing that, which they shouldn't have, that month turned into 2 months, 3 months, 5 months. The next thing I know, it's August 1st. We're going to start camp in 2 weeks, and I hadn't made my decision yet. So that's a very unusual route to take, and a bad one. And I highly would recommend never take that path ever for any guy getting recruited. But I did take that route, and my dad actually brought me out in a boat, and we were riding on the St. Croix River where we had a cabin, and he said, look, I went to Cal. It's my favorite place on the planet Earth. But he said, you know what? I'm not going to be able to see you play more than once or twice a year. That's, my brother Paul was at the time playing there. He was going to be a junior. And so he said, but I'd love to see you. And if you stay here in the Big Ten, I'll promise you this. He said, I'll go to every single game you play. And I said, well, I guess I made my decision. So I ended up deciding on the University of Minnesota. I let Cal Berkeley know. They were disappointed, and they really thought that they had me. And I felt bad being the guy who said I can't do it. And but I did it. And then I went to the University of Minnesota, and I was extremely disappointed early on in my career, was what I'd say. But that's sometimes that happens. I just got there and things weren't what I thought they were going to be right out of the gate. But things changed. So I loved my experience, but the first few months of being there, I wondered if I had made the right decision or not.
Yeah. So you obviously have connections to the West Coast and Pac-12, like you said. You had some family played for Cal. What's your opinion on USC and UCLA joining the Big Ten, and how do you think that, I guess, shakes up the conference?
It's really strange for me because, I'm an old school guy, Tony. You're a young guy. I'm an old guy now. I mean, I say that with half tongue in cheek, but I do. I mean, I know that I'm getting closer and closer to 60 all the time. So, for me, I love the tradition of having these conferences. And what I don't like, and I don't like this at all about the way we've constructed the SEC and now the Big Ten is, you've got all these teams, right? What bothers me is you don't have enough games in a season to be able to play all of your competitors. And for me, that's just odd. I find it odd that, we're going to eventually we'll have 16, but at some point we already know, Kevin Warren has already said likely to see 20 teams in some of these conferences. What I feel bad about is, there's rivalries that will probably be slowed down or maybe won't exist at some point, not right away, but eventually. Yeah. And that's disappointing. And the other thing is, I think that if you're in a conference, you should have the ability to play just about everybody, if not everybody in your conference. And I know now you don't even do that, but it will get worse. And, I think there's something about being able to go into Ann Arbor, Michigan and play a football game in front of 112,000 people, and there's something about going to Ohio State or Penn State. And if those guys are off of the list that year or whatever, it's just not the same. And that hurts a little bit, but I understand why they're doing it. I understand the money really well, because we found out recently that it's close to $8 billion on this TV deal. So I get it. I'm a money guy. That's what I do for a living. And my brother and I have a book called Follow the Smart Money. Well, we're following the smart money into this whole thing with this deal with CBS and NBC and Fox and the whole deal on Saturdays. And it's, I understand it and I understand all the money, but I'm just disappointed because I love the tradition of the rivalries and even just playing within your conference. And, here's the one last thing I'd say about that would be, we will never probably in the not too distant future, we'll never be able to see an Appalachian, you're too young to know this, but you're never going to see an Appalachian State go to Michigan in Ann Arbor and beat them on their own field, because that game probably won't be played years from now, a couple of years from now. They're just not going to be able to squeeze in all those kinds of games in that first couple of weeks. They're going to have to play conference games. And, that saddens me too, because there's something about the unexpected, the David versus Goliath, that I love in college sports.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's definitely an interesting perspective. So like you mentioned early in your Gophers career, it might have not started exactly how you were expecting. It was an interesting time for Gophers football, not the most glorious years. I guess, how would you describe the overall vibe of the program and the team in any given day or year, I guess?
Yeah, well, my disappointment came when I got to the university from the standpoint of, I felt that they kind of bamboozled me a little bit with, they told me I was going to be a running back. They told me I was going to be a running back. I wanted to be a running back, and I get there and they put me in I was 10th string. There's 130 or 40 players on the field because there was no rules back then about the numbers. And, walk-ons and scholarships and everything else. There's a lot of people out there, and I was way at the bottom of the depth chart. And it was just, and I immediately realized right then, a week into practice, I was like, you know what? They're going to make me a linebacker because they didn't really think I was a running back. They just wanted me to come here. And quite honestly, it was the best thing that could have happened to me, was to realize that I was a linebacker early in my career. So eventually I got over my own ego on that and decided that it was going to be a good decision to be a linebacker. And, it was interesting because we had a really good team my freshman year, my true freshman year that I redshirted. And we had great players. We played some unbelievable games. We had this incredible game against Ohio State on national television where we had a duel with them that we lost in the end, but it was a dogfight of a game. And we had a great quarterback play from Mike Hohensee, and Ohio State did as well from Art Schliester, a name from the past, but the quarterback. But then we sort of went into a bit of a dip, and, then coach kind of panicked a little bit. And I love Coach Salem. I'm not criticizing him, but he fired the entire staff, and we started over with a whole new staff of coaches. And we really were in this spin cycle to the downside that was not good. And, we were probably legitimately one of the worst teams in college football in 1983. And so we were 1-10. We got crushed by everybody. And, it was really very depressing, to go out there knowing, man, we're getting beat 50-6 and stuff like that. I mean, it was awful. And the Metrodome, the people were still somewhat supportive of us because it was early with the Metrodome back then. That was our home stadium after going 1 year in the brick house, but it was great. It was, it teaches you a lot. People always say that, but there's a lot of truth to, you do learn a lot from some of the things that are not always a success, and I think I did. And it humbles you immediately, and you become, you have to fight through it, and then just try to figure out how you're going to, change the culture of what we did. And when we hired Lou Holtz, that changed absolutely everything in one day. I mean, the day he was named our head coach and he brought me into his office and we had a long discussion together, and he was worried that some of the players might leave, and try to go somewhere else. And I told him, I said, look, I'm committed. I'm your guy, man. I want this school and our team to be a legitimate team that competes, at the highest level or whatever. And Coach Holtz was just the greatest. I mean, he and I butted heads a lot. I loved the guy to death, but I didn't love him back then. And it wasn't an ego thing, but it was just more of a, he was a different coach than we'd had. So it took a lot of adjusting to get used to Coach Holtz, because he was a guy who would let you know a lot more than you really wanted to hear sometimes, and not all of it good, but it was always to make you better. And it was amazing how fast he turned a terrible program. In 2 years, we went from 1-10, and 2 years later, we're battling with everybody, and we end up going to a bowl game. I mean, and that's before everybody went to a bowl game. I mean, back then there was only so many bowl games, and we actually made one. And it was, it was a huge accomplishment, and it was an amazing experience. And I always tell Coach Holtz to this day, I mean, we're best friends. We love each other, and but we didn't back then. But I'll tell you what, he was a special guy, and he made it all happen.
Yeah. How would you, I guess, compare Lou Holtz as a head coach to Coach Salem?
Well, Coach Salem was a great guy, and he had a lot of charisma, but nobody has Coach Holtz's charisma at all. Nobody. I mean, nobody. The guy, actually, I remember the guy, seeing him go on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson back in the day. And he would do magic tricks. He's from Arkansas, man. I mean, the guy, here's this coach, with this great lispy, weird accent and everything he had going on. And, he had every story in the world that he would tell you, and they were all great. He was very funny, and he did do magic for us all the time and stuff. I mean, he's just an incredible guy. And he's hard to compare to any coach anywhere, including a Nick Saban or anybody like that, because he had his own way of doing things. But, what proved it to me, and when he went to Notre Dame, he was there 2 years and they win a national title, and they were terrible. I mean, they went from the bottom like we were. I just always look back, and I've told people this a million times over. I said, look, if we had Lou for about a 4 or 5 year stretch, we'd have been going to at least 2 Rose Bowls and competing for a title. I honestly believe that, because when he walked into somebody's house to recruit him, it was done. It was done. It literally was. He would captivate anybody, and they could be like Ricky Foggy from South Carolina, or it could be a guy from Georgia, or a kid from Michigan, Bruce Holmes, and some of the players that I played with that he recruited. I mean, once he recruited a guy, they just said, where do I sign? I mean, he couldn't even sign everybody he wanted to, because he was so good at it. He'd have to kind of say, all right, well, we got to back off. We only have so many scholarships. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. His energy and his his ability to get you motivated was second to none.
Yeah, from my point of view, as obviously a younger guy, he just seemed like he was almost ahead of his time, and that he was like a personality head coach that you see now before it was a common thing.
Yeah.
But do you have I guess, a favorite memory from your time with the Gophers? You three-time All Big Ten linebacker. You played in a lot of big games.
Yeah. Here's the bad part about it. It's a game that we lost, but we played so well in the game, particularly on defense. The offense did fine too. But the game that I always think about when somebody asks me that is, we were playing the University of Oklahoma in my senior year, and it was a home game.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd already got a couple games under our belt. This was, I think, their first game of the year. And, just because sometimes timing works that way. And they had All-Americans at almost every position. I mean, you know who their quarterback was. Everybody forgets this, but they all think that, they're this option team, which they are, but it was Troy Aikman was their starting quarterback. Here's a guy who years later goes to UCLA and then eventually goes first pick in the draft to the Dallas Cowboys, and he's playing quarterback at Oklahoma, right? And then they had 3 running backs. All of them were great. They had an offensive line that was second to none. I mean, they were the best team in the country. And for 60 minutes, we battled those guys to the absolute end. I think we might even had a shot at the very end of the game to maybe get an opportunity to win it, which we did not. But it was a losing effort, unfortunately. But I'll tell you, we were truly, David versus Goliath. This is the best team in the country. 2 years before, we get beat 84-13. I remember it like it was yesterday against Nebraska. They put up 21 points in every quarter. You look up on the screen and I'm looking going 21, 21, 21. I mean, it's just amazing. But we turned it around, and here we are now going head to head with Oklahoma, the best team in the entire country. And we had them. We had a shot at them. And, so that game really stood out because with all the All-Americans that they had on the defensive side and the offensive side and all the great players they had, we gave them the game they did not want to have. That's for sure.
Yeah. So you saw multiple coaching changes during your playing days, and now if you look at the Gophers today, obviously PJ Fleck is their head coach. I don't know how close you are with the program today, but I guess what are your opinions on Coach Fleck as a head coach from, I guess, a fan's perspective now?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And I would say this, I was lucky enough later in just a few years ago, I was working with ESPN and I was doing college football and I was color guy. And I actually did a couple of games up at Western Michigan. And then eventually, fast forward a little bit off of that, I moved to Minnesota, and suddenly I was being asked if I was interested in being the athletic director at the University of Minnesota. And it would be the only job I would do outside of what I do, because I thought it was, that was kind of exciting for me. And I was excited. They went through an interview process and everything. And eventually I was somewhere close there, but Mark Coyle had experience that I did not have.
Yeah.
But I said right then and there, and I told my wife, I said, look, I already got a coach. If they're dead set that we're going to release Tracy Claeys, then I already know who I'm going to go after. I'm going to go after PJ Fleck. And he and I have talked about that. He and I are we're good friends. I've gotten along with him for a really long time. He was always very, open with me when he was at Western Michigan, when I was going there as a color commentator, just to talk to him before the games and all the rest of that. And he was great. And, we developed a little bit of a friendship then. And then, of course, when he got here, it developed even a little bit more. I was just at practice on Saturday this past weekend and in the stadium. And, it's fun. It's great to be over there. It's great to see the talent. I mean, PJ has done something that I don't think other coaches had done, in my opinion, before. And I like Glenn Mason, he's a great guy and all that stuff. And I like a lot of the coaches, Jerry Kill, but I don't think anybody else got the talent level that PJ's gotten to the University of Minnesota. I really don't think at any point that I'm aware of in Gopher football. So I go back to the early 70s. I don't know that I've ever seen more talent in my life. I mean, I'm looking at the secondary that he's got right now, the guys that he's recruited from all over the country. and a lot of the Minnesota kids that are on that team, but they've done a great job of canvassing, Minnesota pretty well, and the rest of the country, going down to Georgia, going to Florida, the Carolinas, and we've got kids from everywhere, Texas. And, I think they've done an amazing job giving us an opportunity to see some really good Gopher football. I mean, we've won more 9-game seasons than I think we have under any other coach at this point, practically. It's just amazing just to see what he's been able to build. And, and it's not always been easy, but, and I'd like to see more people in the stadium is what I'd like to see, because I don't think that they understand, a lot of the fans understand just how impressive it is, because Minnesota is not the easiest place to recruit.
No, not at all.
If you've got the history of a Michigan and Ohio State these days, you've got that advantage. And obviously Minnesota is a little bit different. And, it's just a matter of him selling Minnesota to these kids. And he does a great job, because we've got all these Fortune 500 companies here for the after football life. And he's recruited enough kids that have gotten into the NFL. I mean, it's guys, we all go there with a want to get to the next level too, right? I mean, that's part of the ego, but also part of just what you want in your players. You want them to be somebody who is striving to that. Doesn't mean you'll get there, but it's a program that I was standing on the sideline Saturday with about 6 scouts from different, teams, the Bears, and I saw the Giants were there, a guy from Pittsburgh, and we all were talking, and we became good friends almost immediately, because I played against about 3 or 4 of these guys as scouts, and we were just talking about it. And I said, have you ever seen us look like this before? And they said, no. I said, our talent level, I think, is pretty comparable to a lot of the schools that we didn't used to be able to compare against. And they said, you're exactly right. And one of the guys there actually said to me, they said, I think all 5 of your guys in the secondary could be playing on Sundays someday. And I mean, that's not something I've heard from a scout in a really, ever. So it was fun to hear that. And it's encouraging that, it tells me that PJ and his staff is doing a great job.
Yeah, the secondary is the thing that's jumped out to me every time I've seen practice this offseason. It should be great to watch during the season. So I guess I wasn't 100% aware that you were up for the athletic director's position. So did they reach out to you at the time, or how did that kind of process whole start from your point of view?
Yeah, that was an interesting time. I was living in I believe I was living in New York at the time, before I moved back to Minnesota, and they asked if they could speak to me about the athletic director role, and the search committee that they'd formed or paid to do that reached out to me, and I kind of tested them, because I wanted to make sure that this was not just a hokey thing, that they were really doing it. So they said, well, could you do an interview in Minnesota? And I said, no. And they said, could you do an interview? We're going to be down in Pennsylvania. Could you do an interview there? I said, no. They said, where can we do one? I said, well, I'm in New York. So I guess in New York. And they did. And so I sat down with with those guys that the paid group that was brought in, and we sat down for a couple hours and talked over things. And I gave them sort of the roadmap that I had, because I'd always wanted that role someday if it was ever to come up for me. And I was very good friends with our AD, Paul Giel, who was unbelievable. He was an incredible athlete. The guy was the nicest man on the planet. I thought he did a great job as athletic director. And I took a few things from him. And I also, while I was in the NFL, I was jotting down notes to myself about, if I ever was asked to be the athletic director, what would I tell them? And so I basically just regurgitated what I'd already thought about 15, 20 years before. And essentially I just told them, I said, look, we need to get all the companies of Minnesota on board that the University of Minnesota is our school. And if you can do that, and you can convert everybody, not just Target or whomever, don't go after just one donor, but go after all these big, huge, magnificent companies that I trade. That's what I do for a living, that I trade all the time, and so, the combination of getting them involved with the sports programs and getting a little help financially that way. And, building that out. And then, obviously hiring the right coaches that you think would do the right thing to get us to where we needed to get. Because the problem at that time was the reason that athletic director role was open was because of a lot of mistakes that were made and some of the sports teams that were doing things that were probably not considered okay.
Yeah.
So there was that part of it too. And I think those are all fixes that can be made, and we've fixed some of them. I still think we can get more people in our stadiums. That's my only gripe against the athletic department right now is I'm a big financial guy, of course, where to me, it's all about supply and demand. Well, if the demand is not willing to pay the prices, I think we got to bring the prices to a level where we can get the supply and the demand to meet each other. And you know what? People don't like to hear that, but I think it's true in every business. And quite honestly, we all know college sports is a business. It's not just sport. I mean, it's becoming as big a business almost as the NFL or the NBA or anybody else with the TV deals that we're talking about now.
Yeah, the Big Ten, I think their deal is bigger than the NHL, which is just crazy to think about. But so after your career with the Gophers, you obviously bounced around in the NFL. From your point of view, you were in a position where you're fighting for a roster spot some years. What is the hardest part of that's a normal NFL or football fan might not know?
Well, it's tough to put your head down every night when you're sitting there in camp and you're looking at the numbers and you're trying to figure out, do I make this team? Like, for instance, if you're in a 4-3 defense team with 3 linebackers, there's a good chance you might have 6, but most likely you're going to keep 5. Yeah. And so when you put your head down on your pillow, you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute now. There's 9 of us, and I'm trying to figure out where I line up with these 9 right now, and you're going through all of that. You're trying to figure all that out. And it's, it can get in your head a little bit because, it's something like for me, I mean, that was always my dream is to play in the NFL. And I was very lucky that I was able to play and play, a couple of years here and there, but I bounced around for all the right reasons because there were guys that were better than me at certain places. It's always hard to admit that, but you have to be honest with yourself too. And I would look and say, you know what, I'm not as good as that guy, but I know I'm better than that guy. And so, you're hoping that the coaches see it the same way. And, you're hoping to get that spot. And, I was cut many times and then brought back. I think one year with the Minnesota Vikings, they might've cut me 5 times during the year and just kept bringing me back just because that's how the NFL can work. They have to make a roster move and maybe, somebody else gets healthy that wasn't, and they got to get rid of somebody. And well, I was kind of the odd man out sometimes. So, and that happened a little bit in Tampa as well. But it was that I got used to that part of the game. And I'll tell you, if anything else, it helped me in business a lot because, you are humbled amazingly fast in the NFL. When you get cut and they come walking in and everybody sees it on Hard Knocks and all these shows and whatever, it's so much worse than that. I think on Hard Knocks, I think these guys have had to really suck it up and not have tears. But it's amazing, man. I mean, to see grown men, 6'6", 320 pounds, walking down there with tears rolling down their face because they just got released. It's not a good feeling, but if you can take something away from it and learn from it and be humbled, it certainly does help you in whatever it is that you go on to next. If it's not another team and it goes into the work environment, you face some bad things already. And, it doesn't get much worse than that. And that walk of shame that you got to do when you're walking with the coach who's come over, they called him the Turk. When you're walking down there with the Turk and you're getting cut and everybody's looking at you, nobody wants to look at you in the eyes. They're all like, hey, how's it going? And it's just, it's a very uncomfortable thing, but I do think that if nothing else, man, it is the most humbling experience that anybody can ever have.
I would imagine. So obviously when your playing career finishes up, you've now went into a career in investment and TV personality and all that. Has investing always been, I guess, at what point in your life did you know how important that is for someone after their playing career in football? Because we see so many athletes that
Yeah.
don't realize that aspect after their playing days. I guess, when did you figure that out?
Well, I kind of stumbled on the financial path that I've been on because I was pre-med. I had planned on becoming a doctor. I was more interested in orthopedics versus my father, who was a transplant surgeon. But that was always my goal. And when I got released the last year that I played, I'd already missed the starting date for med school. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? I've got a few months on my hands to do something. So my brother John was nice enough to offer me a spot down in Chicago, and I went to the trading floors down there. And I jumped up and down and screamed and yelled and did all that kind of crazy stuff that you do. But, you start at the bottom. You want to talk about humbling. Now, once again, here I am, a former NFL guy for about 4, 5, 6 years. And now I'm standing on a trading floor getting yelled at by a guy who is 5'4" and 130 pounds. And he's yelling at me because I'm not getting my information that he needs fast enough to him. And you're sitting there going, wow, this is just crazy. But eventually I started to understand it, and I understand it a little bit more. And, I literally went from the bottom, being a runner, they call it, you're running around the trading floor, to a guy who became a clerk, to just one trader, to a guy who then became a trader. And then a guy who eventually I moved into the role where I was the risk manager for our firm. And then we just started building different firms once the computer age came. And that was kind of the time where I got involved in TV and doing that type of thing. And then I was asked, actually, because of, people started to know who I was a little bit more. I was asked to speak to the New York Jets about, financial literacy to their players. And then I got more and more exposed to colleges and pro teams that would ask me to do that. And, it was a pretty standard thing that I came up with, but my thoughts were, I can't teach these guys to be financial advisors or anything like that, but I at least could explain to them how fast money goes out of your pocket. And that was kind of my pitch to all the players. And I'd always find one guy, maybe it was the first round pick that year, who's got a $10 million contract. And I always would start off with, so how much money do you think you're going to make? And he'd say 10 million. And I go, nope, the government's going to take 50%. State's going to take 10%. You're going to do, and I would go through the entire process of, well, you're going to buy mom a house. You're going to buy yourself a car. You're going to get clothing. You're going to get watches. And before you know it, guys are looking at me and I go, so that 10 million turned into $1.5 million pretty quick, huh? And you haven't even played yet. Yeah. And, I think it's helpful though. I wanted guys to understand that, the numbers do change very rapidly when you get into the real world, and so I thought it was very important. And, what do you want to do in your after football life, kind of a thing as well. And, I always felt good about at least trying to let guys know, paths that they could take and should take potentially, to avoid bankruptcy, like we've seen so many times with a lot of guys, or something close to that. I mean, I have friends who played, they made over $100 million in their career and they have zero. I mean, so it's amazing. And then everybody gets mad at these players, and it's like, look, some of these guys just didn't understand a lot of the risks that were being taken, and they listened to their agent and they listened to other people, but they don't always get the greatest advice in the world either. And so, my goal was never to tell them what to do with their money other than how fast money goes. And I just wanted to let them know that. But yeah, so it was definitely interesting and a lot of fun. Just trying to help guys out. I spoke last year to the Vikings running backs, as a matter of fact, and I had, an opportunity to just ask them questions. They could ask me questions. And what I was blown away with most from the Vikings running backs were all but one of the guys already had their master's degree. So wow. These guys, I tell you, I am so impressed. And I told them, I go, I can't tell you guys how impressed I am, because when I was playing, most of the guys never graduated. college. They were there for their football degree. and I'm happy to see that there are guys there that are actually, using the academic, essentially the scholarship, the free academics to be able to get a degree. And that's not the end, but at least it gives them somewhere to start when the football is over.
Yeah, definitely. A few more questions I'll get you out on here.
Sure.
You would know as much as anyone. You're obviously connected with the market, what everything's going on. What are your opinions on Bitcoin, I guess? Someone like me, I'm a young guy. Everyone loves to talk about it. I was just curious what your thoughts were on it.
Yeah, it has turned out to be an absolute wild ride for people. I think Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and as a huge thing, because there's so many of them, Ethereum and Bitcoin and this.
Definitely,
there's just a million of them. I think people just have to understand it's kind of a buyer beware kind of a thing. I mean, I think you have to understand that it's a completely, even though it's been around years now, it's still very new, right? I mean, it's when you compare it to just about any other thing in finance, it's so new. It's like, comparing, something a million years ago to something, 100 years ago. I mean, I don't think everybody goes into it with an understanding of the risk that is involved. And there is a lot of risk there. And if I could convey one thing about Bitcoin, it would be just to understand that it's very risky and it's not regulated, which makes it that much more risky. And there's a lot of elements. It doesn't mean to stay away from it. It doesn't mean anything like that, but just have the understanding that it is a high risk, very new, unregulated world of cryptocurrency. And, if you can understand that, I think at least you can hopefully navigate around and not get too hurt, because you can make money very fast, but you can lose it even faster. And it's, I still to this day don't understand Dogecoin, for instance. I mean, and Elon Musk was pretty open with people. He goes, look, it's worthless. What do we, and yet, so it just makes the whole thing pretty interesting to me. But I think it's, it could be something very interesting in the future, but probably not for me.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to follow. But last question I got for you. You talked about how good of a position the Gophers football program is in right now. They've been competing for Big Ten West titles the past few years. What do you think there is, if there is any hump for them to clear to get to Indianapolis and play for a Big Ten championship this year or in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think the talent is there. I'm not worried about the talent. It's just a matter of, there are games. I mean, last year is a great example where you're playing team. You have to win the games that you're supposed to win going in. And you cannot stumble. You cannot lose those games. And they really do hurt you when you do, which like last year, because when you do something like that, it just takes you completely out of the picture because of the fact that you've lost to somebody who's not. It's one thing to lose to somebody who's a top 5, top 10, top 15 team. It's completely different when you lose to somebody from a conference most of us don't even know exists or whatever. So, I think that if we can avoid those stumbles, and then it's a matter of just in the Big Ten, we know exactly who we need to beat in the West, right? And we have a perfect year set up for us this year where we don't have a whole lot of strength that we have to fight against on the East side, other than Penn State on the road. But I think people have to be very well aware, and the Gophers to get over the hump, they've got to beat a Nebraska team, Wisconsin and Iowa, some of those usual suspects. We just got to win those kind of games. And if we can, we certainly have a great shot. But I think the Big Ten is probably as balanced as I've seen it in a really long time. I mean, I'll give you a team that I don't know if it's a sleeper or not, but Purdue. I mean, they've got arguably one of the best quarterbacks in football right now, and a great coach who I've done games that when he used to be at a different university. And so they've got a great coach. They've got a really great quarterback. They've got a lot of talent there. But it's West Lafayette, so it's tough to recruit there, So, I mean, it makes it tougher. But there are teams, I think in the West and the whole Big Ten that I think that we've raised that up a little bit higher, and it's great for the conference, but it makes it that much more difficult. So turnovers and those kinds of things and foolish plays can't happen. I mean, it's one thing to turn the ball over in the middle of the field. It's another when you do it on your side of the field. And that's, those are the things that bite you and make it a lot more difficult to win. But I have a lot of confidence in what I've seen over there so far this year. I think that they've got some receivers and obviously running backs. They all looked healthy. They looked great in practice the other day. They've got a great coach. So I'm pretty impressed with what I see on the football team.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with everything you said. I think that's all I got for you today. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I guess, well, we're both looking forward to a good Gophers season. And thanks again for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you at one of the games, man.
Yeah, awesome.